I'm Ivan Sokolov. This is chess.com. This is the second video in a series of Rook and Knight versus Rook. In the first one, we did deal with two simple examples, and now we are going to start to move, let's say, to a little bit more complicated ones. This is our third example. As we have seen already in the first two examples, well, the positions where, let's say, a weaker side is lost is position where actually king is in a mating net and rook is doomed to passivity, and then the only thing which white somehow needs to do, stronger side needs to do, is to be smart and to move his knight accordingly and to create a mating net. Here we have our, let's say, another typical situation. In this particular position, in order to create a mating net, white needs to bring his king to g6, which he does with his first move, and then to bring this knight to f6. Once this knight is on f6, then rook h7 is going to deliver mate. And now we have to see how to get this done. So we start with move king g6. Black does not have too many moves. I mean, he can either check me with the rook on g8, or he can keep on waiting with his king. Let's see what happens if he checks me on g8. He checks me on g8, I go king h6, threatening mate in 1. Rook moves. If rook g1, trying to be intelligent, because now, well, he's threatening checks from behind. Do you see how to mate black? Now white uses his knight for a cover. Knight goes to g5, and now knight actually covers white king from checks, and next move is rook b8 mate. This check does not help, because okay, king is just well covered from checks. So bringing the rook down is not an idea. So that means that rook needs to remain passive. Now comes knight f4. Now this knight is coming to g6, and we have a mating net, which we have seen in our first two examples. There is nothing to be done now, because knight would come to g6 and rook g7 mate is going to come. Here there is no stalemate, there is nothing. It is just because on such a kind of move, of course, white is not going to take, because there will be stalemate, but is going to just give black one check just to release this king from a stalemate. And next move, white is going to take a rook, and he is going to win. So that means that on a king g6, now let's see what happens if king g8 comes. After king g8, now white has to figure out how to actually bring his knight to f6 and create a mating net. In that respect, knight c7 is a clever move. Why? Because I want to move my knight to f6 via d5, and there are no side checks. Black does not have too many moves. Rook d8, because there are no other moves. Do you see now how with white to win this game? Because what black wants to do, he wants to start giving the side checks. White has here a simple solution in a knight d5. This knight is taboo because of mate on the first rank. And on the other hand, if knight is not taken, next move is knight f6 check and rook f7 mate. So there is not much what black can do, because next move is going to be knight f6 check and mate. So if, let's say, black moves his rook, there is not much else black can do, would be check, and next move is going to be mate. This was our third example, one of the typical examples, where the mating net is created by bringing a knight to f6. Now the fourth one is going to be actually something considerably more complicated. So now we are going to take our fourth example. Our fourth example is going to become actually a little bit more complicated. And fourth example is also important because once we get to the fifth example, which is the most complicated one, with the fifth example, at some moment actually after a series of moves, we are going to get to the fourth example. So here, look at this position. Situation is already considerably different compared to our previous examples, because in all our previous examples, okay, black king was in mate. Okay, this is now also pretty much the case, but rook was doomed to passivity somewhere on the 8th rank. Here we have different situation. Rook is now actually behind. So black rook is now considerably more active. However, black king cannot run away, because if king wants to run away, let's say to f8, then there is going to be knight h7 check. This king will need to go back, and then I'm going to deliver rook e8 mate. So this king cannot run, but there is a catch. If my rook moves from e2, let's say that I make some random move, then actually king can run. You give me check, I run through, and now it's a draw. So we have now important the first phase of this plan. We need a black rook on f4. Why do we need this black rook on f4? We need a rook on f4 because once black rook is on f4, king cannot run to f8 due to knight e6 fork. Forking a rook and a king. So we have to now be a little bit patient to force rook to f4, because once when this rook is on f4, then white actually can try to improve his own rook. So black king has no moves, which is very helpful. So we move rook to e3. We stay on this file. Okay, black moves his rook. We go back. Black moves rook. Now we can move our rook with white. We move our rook. King cannot run to f8, because if king f8, there is going to be a fork. So black does not have too many moves. He needs to remain passive. He cannot play move rook f8, because if he plays rook f8, then it's going to come knight h7. And the knight would come to f6, and it's going to be again actually mating. Now if rook moves, I give check, and we are back to mating net from our example number 2. The knight was going to f6. So black cannot do that. So what black does, he needs to remain passive. He plays rook f2. Okay. Now is important moment. With rook on f2, once when white gets with his king to f6, there is not going to be check on f2 if I put my knight on e4. So this is now second important moment. Pay attention to this. So knight e4, check, only move, because if you don't give me check, I'm going to basically mate you. If rook moves anywhere, I would give a check, and knight f6 mate. Or I start with knight f6 and then I give mate on the 8th rank. So check, king moves. Now, white is having here a terrible threat. Do you see a white threat? Black has no checks. White's threat is check. King would need to go to h7, and once king comes to h7, there is going to be knight g5 check, and rook h8 mate. This is going to happen. So black actually has only one move, and this is to play move king h8. There are no other moves, because if he tries to escape by king, then I start by giving check. And then either I'm going to mate from this side, or I'm going to make to mate from the back rank. One of the two, doesn't matter. So the only move is king h8. Now once with the king on h8, I have to now improve my position further. Now rook d1 is actually quite a good move, because now what I need, now I need this rook again on the fourth rank. So, but since black king cannot move, I need to lose a move, because look, I cannot give now check, because if I give a check, there is move rook g8. But once I lose a move, black cannot move his king, because if king goes to g8, again I have this check. King goes up, okay, check, and we have mate. I'm going to deliver mate on h8. So I need to lose move. Once I lose this move, black can only move his rook. And this rook has only one, actually, only one move, which is rook g4. And now after rook g4, I'm going to play move knight g5. Now again, my king is protected. Check, king moves. I threaten mate on d8. So white has now improved his king, and black does not have actually too many moves. He can either move his king or move his rook, because there is a threat rook d8 mate. If rook f8, it is actually quite nice, because how to win this position? Do you see this? For example, white can start with a knight f7, which looks like a good move, looks like a great move. King g8, check. King back. But now how to win this position? Because if you threaten mate, I'm going to give you check. And when you take by king, it is going to be a stalemate. If you don't want to threaten this mate, then how do you win? This is actually quite a nice motif, because this motif repeats itself. Now, excellent move for white is rook h1. Because after rook h1, I have a terrible threat, knight f7 check, and rook h8 mate. And black does not have any kind of mechanism to stop this, because rook f6 is obviously not a stalemate. I just eat this rook. That means that actually black needs to play a move like king g8. And now with king g8, white is now having another way to win. Now knight goes to e6, check, king goes. And now threat is very simple. Threat is rook d8 check, and knight g5 check, and rook h8 mate. So only way is to move king. Do you see now how to win this position? Actually, quite nice way to win this position is to give check, rook g8. Now how to mate black? Knight f8 forces resignation. Because now black problem is that he doesn't have a move. He doesn't have any move. He cannot move king, and if he moves rook, there is going to be knight g6 mate. Check, and mate on h8. And this is our actually fourth example, which is not an easy one. I think that the most important part about this kind of example, and this is always important to understand, because in a practical play it is difficult to remember everything. You will need to work it out over the board. If you have enough time and you know the principle, you have quite a good chances actually to manage during the game. So here the important part is the way white is playing around, and white is actually pushing this rook to the fourth rank and to the second rank, and the way he needs it, because black rook is the only piece which can move, and white is cleverly executing his technique, placing a black king into a mating net. And now we are going to see in our fifth example, which is going to be in the next video. This fourth example is going to repeat itself, just in a little bit different way. I'm Ivan Sokolov, this is chess.com, and this is the third video in the series of Rook and Knight versus Rook. This is the fifth example of winning positions. Like I said before, there must be probably maybe more winning positions. Here I have come up with the 5 of them. I of course did some research coming up with this. So you would probably find something else in a different endgame books. I also did check it with the computer, and you would have a PGN, which you can address to later. Okay, the difference of this fifth example compared to the other ones is that actually a black king is in a stalemate at this particular moment. There are mating threats. Black rook, on the other hand, is kind of active and not doomed to passivity. So let's see. The first few moves are sort of forced because white is threatening immediate mate. White threatens mate on h2, and white threatens also mate on d8. So black does not have a, let's say, first few moves are sort of forced. Check. Again, there is a double mating threat, check only move. Now there is a mating threat because this rook stands obviously in a way, so rook needs to move. There are 2 logical moves. I mean, rook can either move down or rook can stay on the 7th rank. Let's first see what happens if rook moves to g1. So if rook g1, now white is having, white wins the game by playing rook d7. White wants to mate on h7, obviously. And black is now trying to use a stalemate motif in order to save his game. So rook e1 check, king f7. Okay, now there is a terrible threat, mate on d8. Now, do you see for black how to stay in the game here? Rook d1, this is the only way black can stay in the game, because black is using a stalemate motif. White now hides. Now black has a problem. He cannot play some intelligent move like rook d7 because white is going to take by knight, releasing a king from a stalemate. So black needs to continue his way, rook e1. But now white gets the opportunity to lift his knight. Now actually black has a problem because there is a threat. Threat is rook e8 check. And when king goes up, knight would come with a check, collecting a rook, or delivering a mate on h8, depending a bit what the black is going to do. Collecting a rook, this is actually a threat. So king goes up. Now I cannot. King h7, rook e5. Problem is that if I give a check, I'm not achieving anything because king goes back. And the same story. King and stalemate. I can try to give check on g5. Again, same story. King goes back. Nothing is happening. So I need here a clever move, which is move to improve my rook. Now threat is mate in 1. Check on f1 does not help because check and the next move is mate on h5. So there is only one move, which is rook h1. But now we are actually back to our basic first examples. King in a mating net and rook doomed to passivity. And now actually the way to win the game is to improve the position of the knight and to create a mating net. So check, king goes, check, king unfortunately needs to go back, and now rook comes, and threat is knight f6 check, and rook g6 mate. And this threat cannot be stopped. Running with a king also would not help because would be check. And now white would have a luxury of the choice whether either to collect a rook or to deliver a mate, whatever he prefers. So that means that actually a rook in this position, best defense is actually to keep the rook on a 7th rank. Rook b7 or rook a7. This is basically the best way to try to resist. Now rook goes to g2. Threat is again mate in 1. So only one move. King runs. And king runs. Now black is trying to use this stalemate motif. Because only way to prevent a mate. Because there is a threat of a mate. Rook up. And rook chases rook. And now white is going to do something similar like in our previous situation. The knight is going to protect the rook. King goes. Again, the only way to actually fight here is stalemate. Because what is white threat? Well, if black does nothing, white is going to jump with his knight to e7. And he is going to create non-mating net, something which we were busy with. So rook g7. I can't take, so I need to move rook. I want to create my mating net. Check. And actually now, if you will look at this position, I have now gotten our example number 4. Only difference why people get confused sometimes, and it's easy to get confused actually, I think it's very easy to get confused because at some stage everything starts to look alike, is that now our example 4 is coming from the side, while it was coming from the other corner. The viewing was from the other corner is in our example number 4. And now we need to do the same thing. Look, this rook now goes to actually, in this case, to b6. In the previous case was to f2. So I attack a rook. Now when you give me check, which you need to do, because if you don't give me check, I'm going to basically check with the rook and check by knight and deliver a mate. So now when the rook delivers a check, there is no check on b6, like in this case was not back to f2. And I will use exactly same principle. White is going to use exactly same principle, like in example number 4. Exactly same situation. If you would compare this to example number 4, if you would just play it over, it is exactly same win. It only looks different because the viewing is from the other corner. And that's why it's so easy to get confused in these kind of positions. King up, check. And now white wins because if king goes to g8, it is going to be a same situation. And mate. What I was trying to do in these examples is you can play it over a PGN, and in most of those situations when actually black king is doomed to passivity, and then intelligent moves are needed in order to place a rook on a square needed. And the player who is defending side actually somehow should try to avoid getting his king in a box, so that the only moves would be rook moves and kind of forced rook moves, so that actually a stronger side can take advantage of different kind of motives. So now what I will do, I would show you some practical examples of how actually, surprising enough, the world's best players sometimes did make a mistake in such a positions, because in a practice it is really far from easy. So we are now going to, I would actually like to show one practical example just which shows how easy it is for very strong grandmasters to actually go wrong in these kind of positions. We are picking up a game played by Alexander Onistrung from United States and Dominguez Perez from Cuba. Game is played in a Beal Super Tournament a couple of years ago. White is successfully defending. He has been successfully defending for a while, and possession is objectively drawn. But now for White, how to continue? Well, White has different ways to make a draw here. Different ways. But all of them are connected to one principle. White needs either to keep black king cut along this C file, or he needs to make sure that his rook is in an active position, so that he can actually start giving checks from the side. Most probably tired after very long defense, a white player makes a mistake here, believing that the best way to draw is to actually pin the knight, which is here wrong, and he plays move rook d7. Many moves for making a draw, many different moves, just keeping the king either cut or making sure that rook is active, so that rook can actually give some side checks. In the game happened move rook d7, and actually after move rook d7, position is lost, and black player plays it excellent. He plays move king c2, and now we are all out of sudden getting the situation which we were busy with. King is in mate, and while king is actually potentially in a mate, well, rook does not have active checks. So white tries to run with king, because check is obviously not going to help, because after a move like knight c6, there are no checks, and there is no way to stop a mate on a6. So king runs, Looks more or less like a draw. Do you see a way for black to win this game? Black plays move knight c6, threatening mate and cutting escape of a white king. Now it becomes apparent why was it important, let's say, in such a position to have a rook on, let's say, h7. Because if rook was on h7, I mean, white could have started with the side checks. Now with this passive rook on d7, this is impossible. Threat is mate in 1. There are no checks. So white is trying to escape. Now important moment, because if black would make a mistake, let's say, and move his king, then white would be able to make a draw by activating his rook. But white doesn't get his chance. Do you see how to win this position with black? Black has to be smart and do it as long as rook is on a passive square d7. Check. King. And now a terrible threat. Threat is mate in 1. And actually, this knight on c6 is completely dominating white rook on d7. This rook cannot give a check and cannot come to help his king in a defense because both squares are controlled by a black knight. This is, for example, excellent example how easy is it actually for strong grandmaster to go wrong in such a position.
Hi everyone, welcome to this video. In this video,
because really Onischuk was defending for quite some time this position very successfully. And here just making a one misstep, believing that pinning a knight is a smart thing to do, he landed in a lost position. Because now this knight is all out of sudden completely controlling white rook. By this example from practice, I would like to close this set of 3 videos. In a practice, you would find many strong grandmasters who managed to lose such a position. For example, famous example is the old game between Garry Kasparov with white and Judith Polgar with black, where Kasparov managed to win as a stronger side. And there's also a game between Magnus Carlsen with white and Erwin Lamy in Tata Steel Super Tournament from a couple of years ago, which Magnus managed to win. So it is easy to lose such a position. And if you are stronger side, and this series of videos will help you to recognize the most important motives and improve your chances to actually try to win such a kind of positions. I hope that those 3 videos have been useful.